This is the Title IV, Part A, Subpart 1, Student Support and Academic Enrichment, LEA Random Validation Training in October 2022. The random validation for 22-23 will only request documentation for selected requirements. However, a district must ensure it has documentation on file for all Title IV Part A program requirements. This presentation will provide a brief overview of the Title IV Part A Subpart 1 program purpose and the indicator that will be validated. In this presentation, I will discuss the description of Title IV Part A programs and activities validation requirement. Documenting overall compliance for a program requirement may require several forms of documentation to be maintained locally and available upon request by TEA and/or an auditor. To ensure overall compliance with program requirements, LEA should refer to the program guide and/or other program-related resources that reference the multiple forms of documentation required to be maintained locally. The documentation requested for submission during the random validation process may not include all forms of documentation that are required to be maintained locally. As a reminder regarding the Title IV Part A program's intent and purpose, it is to provide all students with access to a well-rounded education, improve school conditions for a safe and healthy student learning environment, improve technology for the enhancement of academic outcomes and digital literacy of all students. The random validation items are aligned with the Title IV Part A program intent and purposes. This presentation will provide documentation that is required and listed in the 22-23 Random Validation Handbook for Title IV Part A, Description of Programs and Activities. The LEA Random Validation this year for Title IV Part A will focus on descriptions of programs and activities funded with Title IV Part A. The Title IV Part A Statute 4106 provides specific guidance on the requirements an LEA must provide as a description of programs and activities that are funded with Title IV Part A. The description should include any partnerships with an institute of higher education, business, nonprofit, or other entity demonstrating success, how funds will be used for activities related to supporting well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, and/or the effective use of technology in schools. The ESA Consolidated Application Program-Specific Provisions and Assurances, number 11, for the description of Title IV Part A programs and activities, states the LEA will provide a description of programs and activities funded to support the program objectives and intended outcomes related to a well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, and the effective use of technology. On the LEA Compliance Report, one of the LEA Program Compliance Self-Check items state, the LEA has a description of programs and activities funded with Title IV Part A to support the program objectives and intended outcomes related to a well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, and the effective use of technology. The type of selected documentation required for the description random validation is the most recent pages of official auditable documentation providing detailed descriptions on programs and activities funded to support the program objectives and intended outcomes related to one content area. On this slide, you can see the description of Title IV Part A programs and activities would include relevant pages of the most current District Improvement Plan of activities or other official auditable documentation providing a description on how Title IV Part A funds will be used for activities supporting one of the content areas, well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, or the effective use of technology. The standard meeting documentation that an LEA should maintain locally includes meeting agendas, meeting notes or minutes, and sign-in sheets. Please note that documentation for virtual meetings is an acceptable form of documentation. Giving the increased use of virtual meeting environments, participant rosters that include the meeting title, meeting date, and stakeholder names and roles would be acceptable substitutes for the more traditional sign-in sheets. This eliminates the need of a participant signature. Please refer to the table referenced on this slide to determine what is required on meeting documentation and what is considered best practice. Meeting agendas should include the meeting title, campus name, date, and time. It is best practice to include the location of the meeting. Meeting notes or minutes should include the meeting title, campus name, date, and time. It is best practice to include the location of the meeting, stakeholder names of those involved in the process, and stakeholder roles. The participant roster should include the meeting title, campus name, date, time, stakeholder names of those in attendance, and stakeholder roles. It is best to include the location of the meeting. Please note that parents may not be district employees in order to fill the parent roles on the committee. Random Validation 1.1 documentation required for the description of programs and activities are the relevant pages of the most current LEA's District Improvement Plan or other auditable documentation. LEAs must provide a detailed description on those programs and activities that are funded with Title IV Part A funds. Issues that may result in an improvement needed status may include some of the following. Auditable documentation requested was not submitted. Documentation submitted does not provide a detailed description of the programs and activities supported in content areas. Documentation submitted does not align to the requested documentation of programs and activities requested item, and the documentation from a prior year was submitted instead of the current year's documentation. Thank you for attending the session. If there are questions following this presentation, you may contact Lenitra Guess, the Title IV Part A Program Director, by phone or email. Thank you and have a wonderful day.